Well, this morning, both presidential candidates plan to stop at Ground Zero to commemorate the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. This after Donald Trump and Kamala Harris showcase starkly different visions for the country, I should say, 8 weeks ahead of our election. The two shook hands, with Harris introducing herself to Trump for about 90 minutes. The candidates went head-to-head on some of the nation's top issues as they continue to try and win over the remaining undecided voters who could determine the outcome of the 2024 race. This is Harris's first presidential general election debate. It's Trump's seventh. And it comes just 75 days after his meeting with President Joe Biden, which led to Biden withdrawing from that race. This is the only firmly scheduled debate between the two and may end up being the only one. For more on some of the night's biggest moments, we have political science professor Ian Anderson joining us to talk about this morning. First of all, Ian, welcome back to Eyewitness News.
Appreciate it.
Glad to have you. What was your takeaway from last night's debate?
A very different debate than what we saw early on. I think it was a rematch, I think, before, and now we've got some real candidates, some real options. I think this was our first time to see Harris.
Yeah.
Is she presidential? Can she keep up with the former president? And she can. I think that we really saw an articulate person that was interested in spreading hope as well. It was positive.
Yeah, she was very charismatic. You could tell that she was rehearsed for it and ready to go. Let's talk about her for a second, because that's that sudden switch for the Democratic Party. Biden leaves right after he said he wouldn't leave,
right.
And then he was. Some people say he was forced out. Others say that he wasn't. But now Kamala is in the race. Does that influence our voters?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said earlier, I think we were gearing up for a rematch, Trump-Biden kind of thing. And then with this change, I don't know if it's going to necessarily change people's, whether Democrat, Republican, that kind of push, but you now see a new pathway. And I think one of the things that's important, just as a professor, is that the younger generation of voters do matter. And younger voters tend to not feel as engaged. I mean, just demographically looking at the two previous candidates, we're not necessarily reflective of the younger generation. You said I did. But when we think about it too, like our country as a whole, Kamala represents many demographics that are very important. So I think it was a new conversation. I think that it's pretty clear that she is a contender now. But I think we still need to spend time going deep. This should not make your decision for whether you vote or not. You need to do more research.
That's an interesting response there. This shouldn't make your decision. There were, in fact, we'll take the viewer poll right here. You can see this here. Does this determine the fate? Here's that question up on the screen. Will the Harris and Trump debate persuade you to vote differently? And 88% of you basically say no. There's 12% that say yes. Is that independent vote that you think is saying yes to that poll?
Oh, probably. When we think about, because most people are pretty much, if you're a Republican Democrat, you pretty much know who you're going to vote for. And keep in mind, we have lived through a Trump presidency. So when Trump talks about what he can do or going to do, he's had 4 years that he has done and accomplished things. And so for voters, people have lived through that. They don't quite know what Harris will do. It's not necessarily saying that she's going to be better or worse, right? But we've actually lived through Trump's experience.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you say that she's the same as Biden, though? Because she's vice president to Joe Biden, so it's the same administration.
See, that's an interesting piece, right? So understanding the role of the vice president and the president. So the vice president, the power of the vice president is really determined by what the president allows them to do, really. Her most powerful role has been in the deciding votes in Congress, right? So yeah, I think you can get some ideas on the way that she's going to probably influence policy or bring things in from the Biden administration.
Well, let me ask you about policy. So they talk about the economy, they talked about abortion. What was the topics that stood out the most to you?
Well, okay, so one, the economy, and I think with the economy, it's very complex. It's not just necessarily the president comes in and waves their hand and suddenly, tax burden's gone, right? What I found very interesting was that there are business schools, like the Wharton School of Business, that has reviewed both of these plans. And so for myself, I think it's a good idea to go back and look at them. I think some of these other pieces, when we talk about just nationwide abortion ban or nationwide removing all guns.
Those we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, those topics really, if you understand the process of how bill becomes law, it's just not realistic. Former President Trump had brought up the fact that he wasn't even going to consider vetoing a nation abortion ban because it wasn't likely to come to his desk. And
that's because the Supreme Court sent it back to the states, so it stays with the states.
Right. And that's another piece too, and I think that's one of the things I really wanted to highlight is that we live locally, as cliche as that sounds. And so when we're thinking about the economy, taxes, even access to health care, the state and the local government play a much larger role in our daily lives. And so that's really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about things like, okay, am I going to vote for somebody because of the potential of a nationwide ban? There's 17,000 bills currently in front of Congress currently, and only 7% of those are actually going to become law.
You were telling me before this, you teach students and people about the laws itself and government, the policy. What would you tell to our viewers now after they watch the debate or not, and they're going to see clips of this throughout the next week or two? What would you tell them about these policies?
So both of these individuals have track records, right? And so what I would first do is, if this is your first introduction to Kamala Harris, I would go to govtracks.us. You can search her and you can see her entire voting history. Because keep in mind, she was an attorney general, a U.S. senator. And so you can actually see if you can decide for yourself based on her votes and her policies, she uber liberal or should not, does it fall in line with you? Same thing with former President Trump. Go back and do some research, look at and think about, where you were then, where you are now. Time is very different. I also think Ballotpedia is a good resource for people to be able to go in and look at policies in a relatively non-biased standpoint.
And it's easy to look at the policies of what former President Trump had. He was president for 4 years. At the end of the debate last night, superstar Taylor Swift endorsed Harris. Does celebrities have a role in endorsements at all?
So yes, I mean, we should always, make our own decisions. But the truth is, people are very busy, and celebrities do influence people's views on policy. I mean, they probably spend more time paying attention to what Taylor Swift is doing than probably what the president is doing. Let's be honest, more people probably watch her concerts. And that being said, the political socialization factors like that do influence things. But I think that's more of a younger generation piece as well. So hopefully, and that's where Harris may have a bit of an advantage, is that she is appealing a little bit more to that younger demographic.
Interesting, though, one of her friends, Patrick Mahomes' wife, Brittany, supported former President Trump. So
you never know.
You never
right?
know. It's both sides. There it is. Ian Anderson, professor, thank you so much for coming in this morning and talking about the debate. We let you talk about the hard stuff, and you guys make the decisions coming up in November.